Hello, haven't made a video for a while. Decided that this would be the perfect time to talk through some stuff now that I'm at my parents' place over Christmas and have a bit of free time. Thoroughly got into the Christmas spirit as well. Look at this. Look at this incredible sparkles. Alright, that's enough fun. Business to be done. Alright, so the Overwatch League announced the second tier of competition, the Contenders stuff that's going on, and actually release a huge amount of information, including the rule set. And there's a ton of changes to a lot of different scenes. So I decided to unpack this. I think it's going to be quite a long video. So I'm going to put some timestamps in the description if you want to hop forward to whatever part interests you. There's going to be some pretty crucial stuff, I think, actually, that I'm going to go through that a lot of people seem to not be talking about, which I assume means that they haven't seen it, because there's a lot of juicy info in here. So first of all, just like the broad overview, Contenders is obviously the secondary tournament underneath the Overwatch League. It's like the tier of tournaments that basically spans the globe. So it used to be only in Europe and North America. So they had this Season 0 kind of thing. They had Season 1, which I was part of. When was that? From like August? No, from whenever. It was like late summer of 2017. And the next one's going to begin in March of 2018. And it's their basically their premier tournament underneath the Overwatch League. So it's very much tier 2, but it's covering everywhere. So for some places in the world, it's going to be tier 1 because they don't have any Overwatch League spots yet. So the best teams are going to be playing over there, and it's still going to have a pretty high level of competition. So new to this season of Contenders, which I have no idea what they're going to call it because I've already had Season 1, but this is really the beginning of it, so who knows. Season 1.1. They've taken over Apex in Korea, they've taken over the Overwatch Premier Series in China, and they've taken over the Overwatch Pacific Championship in like Taiwan. I guess you call that area like Southeast Asia. Taiwan, Thailand, Japan. There was one Korean team and one Australian team in there as well. So they've taken over those tournaments. As far as I'm aware, those tournaments are no longer, and Contenders is going to run it instead of those. And so there's some pretty big fundamental changes in terms of the format and in terms of prize pool and stuff like this. So it's important to run through this. It's also been launched in Australia and South America as well. Brand new over there. So there's now some competition in Australia and South America. Each region, so the 7 regions, Europe, North America, the new ones that have replaced things in Korea, China, and Pacific, and then the brand new ones where there was nothing really before in Australia and South America. So those 7 regions, each of those tournaments will have 12 teams playing in Contenders. So you have whatever your Overwatch League teams, most of them in North America at the moment, or in fact all of them will be, but most of them are from North America at the moment. And then you have 12 Contenders teams in each region. So just to add some context, Apex had 16 teams previously when it ran. So it's a decrease in the amount of really viable Korean slots that there are in the tier 2 scene. Although Challengers is always fiercely competitive, there's a big drop off once you get out of what was Apex and is going to be Contenders. So the size in Korea has gone from 16 to 12. The Overwatch Premier Series in China had 12 teams anyway in like their spring and summer series. So that's going to stay the same size. And Contenders in Europe and North America last season had 8. So it's going to increase size to 12. But there's some things with the format that mean that not all 12 teams are actually going to play each other, which I'll get into later. And the Overwatch Pacific Championship had 8 as well, same as Contenders. Now that's going to be expanded. The size of the tournament is going to be expanded. Some pretty interesting kind of legal things about where you can play from. I assume now that they're getting now that esports is getting a little bit bigger and receiving a bit more attention, and the fact that people need visas if they want to go and play in international tournaments and stuff like this, I think some countries actually designate competitive video gaming as under gaming rules, as in like gambling rules. So I think there are a number of countries worldwide where you're ineligible to play, as in you can't play in Contenders if you're from one of these countries. And so it gives a list of country names. Now there's no country really that's like been a powerhouse of esports or anything that's been left out, but there's some interesting ones, for example, a lot of the African teams are not mentioned, which I assume is just kind of because there's no contenders system in Africa as well. There's some interesting kind of weird aspects between the two. For example, India is an eligible company, but Pakistan isn't, and like most places around South America are eligible. Suriname doesn't seem to be. Panama in Central America doesn't seem to be listed. Places like Jordan and Lebanon and places in the Middle East, there's quite a few places missing there. Now, I don't know if this is for legal reasons or whatever. Maybe they're planning to expand in the Middle East at some point, but there's been a few. I mean, apart from Israel, there really are only a few notable players in other esports and stuff like that from that region. But that's just something to keep in mind as well. But really not the most important point. Each team, so there's 12 teams in the region. Each team is allowed 9 players. So it's not like the Overwatch League where you're allowed 12. Each one's allowed 9. This is kind of similar to how Contenders ran in the past, I think, where you're allowed 9. Basically, like, you have a starting roster of 6 and then you have 3 substitutes, which I think is a reasonable amount. I think 12 is really quite a lot. It shouldn't really hurt anything at all. And teams, this part actually did get discussed on Reddit a little bit, but I just want to make some clarifications because people didn't understand properly that where it says in the rules, teams may not be owned by players. So, for example, people I think watching will be familiar with the team Kungana, which Michael, well-known number 2 tracer in the world, owned and ran last season in Contenders as a player. So he was the player. He owned the spot. He owned the organization. And that's no longer allowed. You're not allowed to own it if you're a player, but that doesn't mean that he wouldn't be allowed it or would have to sell it to somebody else. He would just, I assume, have to create a legal entity for Kungana, something like an LLC, which it says in the rules that they would help facilitate it with. So I believe that that's the process now, is that for whatever reason, probably some legal reason, you're not allowed to own the spot as a person. You must be a legal entity, and therefore people who own teams like, for example, 123, which I think the spot is currently owned by Denia, and Kungana, which was owned by Michael. I assume these people will have to make legal entities, LLCs, whatever, in order to run their spot. Shouldn't really change anything. They'll still be the owner of the company which owns the spot. But so I don't think that it's the case, as people were wondering, that player-owned organizations would be driven out or have to sell to other people or anything like that. I think it's just a legal thing. So there's the broad overview. Now we're going to move on to the next section, which I think is really interesting, which is the prize pool situation, because the prize pool has changed quite significantly for a lot of regions. I mean, some of them are crazy. For example, the Pacific Championship, or rather what is now going to be Pacific Contenders, has not halved but 1/3'd its prize pool. 1/3'd the prize pool. A massive drop for the people in the Pacific region, whereas people in North America and Europe have potentially seen an increase in the amount that they can win. So the way that it works is a little bit like how Apex prizes used to work, where at the end of the tournament, yes, you get paid based on whether you came first, second, third, etc. But you also win money for winning a match, whether it's in the group stage or in the playoff stage. And you also win a smaller amount of money for losing a match. Well, so you basically get paid for turning up at times. And because there are a maximum of 8 games throughout the season. I'll get into the format later on, but there's a maximum of 8 games that a team could play in one season. If you played 5 regular season games and then 3 playoff games, if you were either the first or second best team, so you played in the final, you could potentially win. Like, if you won all 8 of those games and finished first, you would win the maximum amount. Now, let me see if I can bring this up on the screen actually. Because this is a little bit of a pain. I'm going to have to add the scene. Sorry, I didn't set this up beforehand. Add new. Let's go for window capture. Go for window capture. Window capture just going to capture the whole screen? I don't actually know. Oh no, here we go. No, okay, that didn't work at all. Never mind. Okay, I'm not going to bring it up. I'm maybe paste them in the description below then. But you'll have to bear with me here because I'm going to spit some numbers at you. So the Contenders prize pools are lumped into 3 categories. So Contenders views China, Korea, Europe, and North America as its premium regions, and it pays them the most prize money. The Pacific region went from being the highest paid region of all to the second tier. So you have Europe, North America, Korea, China at this tier. Then you have Pacific, gets this much prize money. And then it's the new regions of Australia and South America, which I think accurately reflects the competition and the skill level at the moment. Although pretty arguable given that the Pacific region actually has some foreign teams in it. Now, to set out some context before I go into the numbers again, Australia's best team, Blank, plays in the Pacific, and also a Korean team who's actually a really good Korean team called Ardiont also plays in the Pacific. Now, Ardiont before were probably like a top 5 team in Korea. I don't think that's too much of a stretch. I think they were probably somewhere around top 5. Now, having with the 4 best teams in Korea having gone to the Overwatch League, they're probably one of the best in Korea, but they actually play in the Pacific region, and the whole reason that one of the best Korean teams and the best Australian team played in the Pacific region was because they had far larger prize money and weaker competition overall than the Korean scene. So the Pacific region used to have nuts prize money. So let's go through this tier 1 of contenders first. So remember, this is Europe, North America, China, and Korea. So the overall prize pool for the region, as in the amount that Blizzard are actually going to pay out, this includes the prizes for coming first down to 12th, and also the prizes for winning and losing matches, is $108,929. So in Europe and North America, that has gone up from $100,000 last season. So last season it was $100,000. You didn't get any money for winning or losing games. They just paid you on your placing at the end. So it was $40,000 for coming first. So for example, Envious got $40,000 for coming first. It was $15,000 for coming second, as in you made it to the final and lost the final. So FaZe got $15,000. Big drop from first to second, but that's how tournaments normally do it. And then third and fourth place got $10,000. So FNRG, FE, and Envision got $10,000. And the way that this is now working with the 108,000, it's basically 109,000, right? It's only $71 away from being 109,000. So basically, the new $109,000 prize pool is split slightly more evenly, so that if you're the first place team and you won every game in the regular season, so you got as much winner money as possible, and you also finish first, so the maximum you can possibly make in the league from prize money is $34,696. So it's actually less for coming first than it used to be in Europe and North America, despite the overall prize pool going up. And the reason for that is that it pays out better to the lower level teams as well, which should make the league a little more sustainable, so that you don't have to actually finish in the top 4 or something to see any kind of return on your investment across the players. Obviously, the teams that finish last are not going to be seeing actual profit based on the prize money, but it goes a bit more. It's a bit more spread out, right? It's a bit more even, while still rewarding the teams that finish higher and actually win more games with more money. When you compare that to the Chinese prize pool, the old Chinese prize pool was $150,209 roughly, once it's been translated over from yen. Do they use yen? I think so. So that's a drop of about 42,000 in total. Again, there is a drop for coming first, second, or third. So if you came first, second, or third in the new system whilst winning as many games as possible, for example, if you finished second by winning all of your regular season games, you won the quarterfinal, you won the semifinal, then you lost the final, you only lose one game, you still get paid a little bit for that, but not as much as you won. You get the second place prize pool, you get $16,889. Now, the same thing for third is $11,427. Now, compared to what they were winning before, the top earning team in the OWPS, Miraculous Youngster, won $45,518. So this was more than Europe and North America were paying in Contenders, and it's more than Contenders is playing this season. So China has seen a drop in prize pool, and also a drop in terms of what each person is making, I think. I'm not actually sure how it trickles down right to the bottom. Maybe the teams at the bottom are getting a better deal. They probably are in this system, but the people at the top are definitely not. If you go up to Apex, the drop is even larger. So the old Apex prize pool was $177,484 once you translate it over from, I have no idea what the Koreans use. Is it won? Won, I think, rings a bell. I think it's something like that anyway. So it's 177,484. Again, we're dropping down to the same amount as China, Europe, and North America, which is 108,929. And the old Apex prize pool was very highly stacked towards the person finishing first, but it also rewarded you for winning. So GC Busan last season, having won all possible games other than one, so they actually lost twice, but because it was double elim, they could have only won 2 games in the second part of the playoffs, or rather the second part of the groups. So the only game they failed to win was one against Luxury Watch Red, I think. Was it LW Red? I think so. In the group stage. So they won almost the max that you can win in Apex, which was $91,937. Nearly $92,000 they won last season of Apex, and that has been reduced to an absolute maximum. Again, same as China, Europe, and North America, of $34,696. So a big drop. And actually, the team that finished second in Apex this season, which was Runaway, earned more than the first place winner possibly could in the new Korean Contenders model. But again, the further that you go down, the more it slightly starts to balance it, so that people at kind of towards the middle and the bottom of Apex will be paid a couple grand more than they would have done in the previous model, despite the fact that it was about $70,000 more overall in the prize pool. $70,000 more overall in the prize pool in Apex. I hope you're following here. I know it's difficult to think about numbers when you don't have them right in front of you. I hope I remember to paste them in description so that you can kind of follow along. So now let's go to the one that's received the biggest blow, which is the Pacific region. Now, to me, it never made sense that the Pacific region had this much money anyway. It didn't have the level of competition. It didn't have the kind of esports renown for like ever having world-class level of competition in really any kind of game. I can't think of a Pacific team being the best in any esport. I guess I could be wrong. I think some of the Southeast Asia teams are pretty good in Dota or something. I don't know. I don't follow the scene particularly well. But anyway, it's not a large region, right? It's not like Europe, North America, or Korea, or even China. And it used to have a nuts prize pool of $274,785. Huge prize pool, unbelievably large. Which, as I say before, attracted Australia's best team and one of Korea's best teams to play over there as well, and massively increased the level of competition by drawing in other talent from other regions with their large prize pot. Now, this has been dropped below the level of Europe, China, North America, and Korea. So now the prize pool for Pacific is $81,706, with a maximum first place prize if you won all of your matches of $26,020. So that's a few grand, actually almost 10 grand more than if you came second in Europe or North America or China or Korea. But it's still quite a bit less. And then the second place, the max that the second place team could get is $12,666. The max that the third place team could get is $8,568. And when you look at Australia and South America, they have a pretty vastly reduced. It's not really vastly reduced at all, because these are brand new regions that certainly don't have the same level of competition as the others and aren't likely to produce the same level of talent. So I think it's quite reasonable for them to have a lower prize pool. But the prize pool there for Australia and South America is $27,260 overall. That's the amount that Blizzard are paying out. And your potential max as a first place team is $8,676. Second place team $4,222. Third place $2,859. So these are really quite low prize pools, but I mean compared to the others, which are pretty large, but certainly enough to pump interest into the scene, absolutely, and certainly more than they were playing for beforehand. Playing for a max nearly 9k prize pool 3 times a year is nothing to sniff at, for sure, for regions that normally don't have that much really going on in their esports circuit. Um, but it would be unreasonable not to say, I think, that Korea and the Pacific region in particular are getting a pretty raw deal here, because they have massively reduced the prize pools. Now, I think the reasoning for this is probably pretty obvious. Um, this is just my pure speculation, but it seems to me that when you take the burden of providing prize money away from a company like OGN, Apex, um, which already has pre-existing relations with sponsors and is able to get all of this prize money from those sponsors, um, suddenly now Blizzard have to bear that burden, and it becomes a matter of budgeting for how much they can afford or how much they actually want to spend into it, and they don't have access to the same sponsors, and potentially in the future they would, so these prize pools could still increase. But at the moment it's a step down, and it remains to be seen actually how this will affect the Chinese, well, mainly the Korean. I was going to say Korean there. Don't know why I said Chinese. The Korean kind of vigor for competing in Contenders, or what used to be Apex, because it is a quite significant drop in what you would get if you were going to come first place. But the whole Blizzard plan with Contenders seems to be about sustainability, and that is reflected in their payment out in a much steeper curve. So like the best teams aren't like miles up here, and then it's not. Hello, what am I doing? So the best teams aren't miles up here, and then it suddenly goes really steep. It's much more of a gradual decline in terms of your performance related to your payout. So the teams at the bottom should get a slightly better deal and might be able to stay afloat a little easier, rather than just trying to scramble to win the highest prize possible. So another big question for the Korean, Chinese, and Pacific regions, whether or not they'll be played on LAN. And this is a massive question that still hasn't been answered with the rule set or with the information that they've released. We have no idea whether Korea, which used to be Apex, obviously very well respected LAN competition, hosted by OGN, a massive draw, respected amongst the Chinese, the Korean competitors for being on LAN as well, with an actual LAN client. And we don't really know if that's going to continue at LAN. I think if it didn't continue at LAN, that would affect the players' desire to play there massively. And I think it would be a big blow to both Korea and China, probably the Pacific as well, if they went away from LAN. The way that the schedule is set up, it seems like these will still be on LAN, and EU and NA may still have LAN finals. Again, they haven't released any information. It's just a concern that if you take over a region and Blizzard decide to take it back to online, yes, that's better for the organizations, and it's one of the reasons that I think Europe and North America should stay online, is that with LAN finals, is that for organizations, then you don't have to house your players. You can have them play from their bedrooms. You don't have to pay for all of the infrastructure required with keeping them in a LAN and keeping them fed and having them transported and ferried everywhere and what have you. You don't have to pay for a team manager or whatever to be there with them. So it makes there's a lot less strain on the organizations if the league is online. I think that comes back to the sustainability thing. That will really help for the European and North American organizations trying to get back into it. But for Korea and China and the Pacific region to a lesser extent, I think the players just really want this. And if they have to go back to online, I think that will kill the hype for so many of them. They'll just decide not to play anymore, because the game is really quite different. You're dangling the carrot of playing a LAN from them, and if you snatch it away, they're likely to kick their toys out the trolley, out the pram. Don't put your babies in a trolley. The next thing to tackle is the idea of academy teams. So some information was released on academy teams, and that is basically the push for Overwatch League teams to have farm teams, secondary teams, basically just contenders teams, and they're going to be called academy teams. And so 9 Overwatch League teams have decided to field rosters in Contenders. I think the ones that haven't are LA Valiant, Seoul Dynasty, and is it Shanghai Dragons? No, I don't think it was Shanghai Dragons. Who was the other one? LA Valiant, Seoul Dynasty, and nuts. Who's the other one? Don't know. Don't really care. Okay, so 9 of the teams are going to field rosters in Contenders, and so what that seems to have done is that even with the increase to 12 teams in each region, because so many of the Overwatch League teams are from North America, their Contenders teams have to be based in North America, also it seems, because they all have done. Apart from, for example, the London Spitfires who've gone into Europe, even though they've got Koreans. So it does seem to be based on where your Overwatch League city is based, which makes sense in their system. So these 9 new Contenders teams have shoved out Kungana and Renegades, it seems, from Contenders North America. I'll get into that later. So these academy teams, I assume that they can still be relegated like any other team. So it could be like 2 years down the line, none of these, I mean, if they all fail really badly, none of these academy teams could be there anymore, which is weird because you would expect the academy teams to be a staple of Contenders because they're going to be like direct farm teams from Overwatch League. But as far as the rules state, they are still able to be relegated down to the open division. So I'll kind of get into the relegation and promotion system later, but I thought that was an interesting quirk that the academy teams could all just kind of disappear, end up relegated. And I also think it's kind of strange that NYXL have a North American Contenders team as well. And to that regard, kind of similar for London Spitfire, but London Spitfire, I think, have decided to use their Contenders spot to big up a bit of their fan base. They said that they want a primarily British roster because they come from London, and so the London Spitfires Contenders roster, whatever they end up calling it, would be kind of more of what fans were expecting, or the people that fans could bond with, and they're hoping that that'll drum up support for the brand as a whole. So, fine there. NYXL are kind of weird because the farm teams, if you've got a team like NYXL and they're full Korean, the guys that you want to pick up mid-season or for Overwatch League Season 2 and stuff like that are all going to be these brand new up-and-coming Korean players, of which there are tons, and some who are just about to turn 18 and be available. And so they, as an organization, should really be putting their resources into looking through these diamonds in the rough of Korean Contenders. But they can't have a team over there because the only Korean team is Seoul Dynasty. So it seems like they can't have a Korean Contenders team, but instead have opted for a North American Contenders team and will be running it presumably with Western players. I think Flower and AKM, maybe it's going to be some kind of mixed roster, maybe they bring some Koreans over. I think we're going to see something interesting out of NYXL, and it'll be interesting to see how they utilize that and whether or not it really does help their Overwatch League team in any sense, or whether it's just some side project they have. Other teams were also given invites to Contenders, so basically if you had a Contenders spot from last season and your team didn't go to Overwatch League or disband, so for example Misfits don't have their spot anymore in Contenders because they, in European Contenders, because they went into the Overwatch League, they have an academy team but it's based in North America, so they've kind of just jumped over to North America. But teams like 123, teams like Giganti, these guys still have their spots in European Contenders. As I said, okay, let's go for the Chinese Contenders teams that got invited as well, because that one's slightly strange. All the people that you would expect have been invited to Chinese Contenders, except a team called Legend Young Beyond have been invited, which I assume is the previously named Laoyin B, like LYB was a team, and they used to be called Laoyin B, I think. And now they're being referred to as Legend Young Beyond. I don't know whether this is some weird thing about the organization that I wasn't aware of before. I've always called them Laoyin B or LYB. And I don't know why they've been invited to Contenders, to be honest. They haven't had good performances recently. They didn't even really compete in the summer. I think they just got knocked out in spring or something. Didn't have a great performance in Nexus Cup either. But they've been invited to Contenders China over teams like FTD, who had some really good results. they had some like consistently good results or consistently average to above average results, which is good enough to get you an invite back into Contenders because they were average within the skill of Contenders. And teams like OMG, who played really well in spring and completely wrecked LYB, but then played really badly in summer. I could see why they might not be in there, but LYB just have no good results, right? So I don't understand why they've been invited, but presumably there was some kind of thing behind the scenes where they had to decide who was eligible, or maybe FTD, OMG, and Team CC just didn't want to play in Contenders for some reason. I have no idea. It's just a bit weird that LYB's been invited. I don't have a reason for that. And so Contenders NA is one of the most interesting ones in terms of the invites, because you would have expected that Kungana and Renegades would keep their spots from the previous season. Now, we had no idea how promotion and relegation were going to work last season, and so given that Kungana and Renegades finished, I think it was bottom 2. Kungana, in fact, may not have finished bottom, but anyway, they were somewhere right near the bottom. So it would have been pretty reasonable for them to be relegated anyway if there was some kind of promotion relegation system involved. And so I don't think that they were completely like set. Like I don't think they knew for sure that they had their spot. But with all of the new Overwatch League North American teams dropping down from their academy teams, dropping down from OWL straight into North American Contenders, 7 new academy teams have joined Contenders North America, and that's added to the 4 that already had their spots. That makes 11. There's only 12 in Contenders NA, and so there wasn't room for Kungana and Renegades, so they have both been just invited to like this trial system, which is the promotion relegation thing. So we will see only one of Kungana or Renegades in the next season, and that's even assuming that they beat out the other people who've been invited to trial for the spot. So there's only one spot left in Contenders North America. But there are still a ton of academy teams who don't have rosters yet. So if you're a player, this is not really bad news. But if you're a set team that was looking to get into Contenders, people like Kungana, people like Rise Nation 2, that just got announced with Faz and Midnight and Ginger Pop and people. If you're a team like that, it is bad news for you guys, unless you can be picked up in your entirety by an academy team. There's only one spot left in Contenders North America, just because all of these OWL Academy teams have come there, it seems. So along with Rogue, FNR GFE, FaZe, and Vision, the 7 Contenders teams makes up 11, and then there's only one spot left for Kungana, Renegades, or any of these other teams. But there's still a lot of player spots. And so this brings us on to what are the Contenders Trials. So I said that Kungana and Renegades were invited to Contenders Trials. So this is the promotion and relegation system that's going to happen every season to determine who gets dropped down into Open from Contenders and who gets brought up from Open into Contenders. So it works a lot like Apex did with Apex Challenges. 8 teams per region are invited to Trials, which is this kind of tournament where the top 4 are going to go, well, normally the top 4 are going to go into Contenders, but this time it's dependent on how many slots are available. Okay, so there's 5 slots available in Europe because Misfits buggered off, and it's increased from 8 to 12, so there's 5 slots available in Europe. There's only 1 spot, as I've said before, in North America available. There's 4 spots available in Korea because they've only handed out invites to 8 teams. There's 3 spots available in China because they've increased it from 8 to 12 teams, but one of them's been taken up by the Shanghai Dragons Academy team. So 3 spots available in China out of the 8 teams that are going to be trialing. There's 4 available in the Pacific, 4 available in Australia, 4 available in South America. So of the 8 teams that they invite to Contenders Trials, that's Trials with a capital T, it's like their name of the system. Normally, it's going to be at the end of this season, the bottom 4 teams of Contenders in each region, so the bottom 4 European teams, will meet the top 4 Open Division teams, and between the 2 of them, the best 4 of those will go into Contenders for the next season. So you've got a pretty wide overlap there of 4 teams. So a whole third will be dropped down into promotion system, and the whole third, all four of them could go back up into contenders if they're the better teams. But for this season, as we're determining who fills up the extra slots, there's a difference in the amount of spots available for each region. So again, Europe, the one with the most slots available, has five slots available for brand new teams. And wait a second, does it have 5 slots available? Because the London Spitfires have gone in. Let me think about it. Let me just double check this. I'm just taking a look. Oh yeah, because somebody else has dropped out as well. Who else dropped out? Cloud9, of course. Cloud9 dropped out as well, and they've been replaced by London Spitfires. So Cloud9 and Misfits both dropped out. They've both been... Only one of them's been replaced by London Spitfire, and therefore there's 5 slots. Yep, my maths was correct the first time. Okay. So, in Europe, presumably 8 teams are going to be selected out of the newly built rosters for contenders. I don't know how they're going to be invited to trials, but I think actually that 4 new teams will join the top 4 from Open in trials or something like this. So if you played well in Open, I think you get an invite to the trials, and if you are a brand new team, you also get an invite to the trials. Now, Korean Contenders Trials are weird because that's the only region in which the Contenders, or the Tier 2 system, so from Apex to Contenders, Apex to Contenders, it's gone smaller. It was 16 teams, now it's 12 teams. So Contenders in Korea has had to actually kick out some of the teams that were in Apex, and they go into Apex Trials, so they have to fight to get back into Contenders. So Korea has invited Blossom, a team that was formerly managing GC Busan, or rather was GC Busan before they partnered with Busan and were sponsored by them, I think. So Blossom now have to field a whole new roster to fill that spot. Kongdu Panthera, who we've just seen in Nexus, Lunatic High, and that's the brand new team that came second in Challenger. Foxes, who were the NC or RX Foxes. Runaway, we all know. WGS Red, who used to be Luxury Watch Red, who used to have Wicked and Nene and stuff. X6 Gaming, who've just picked up Architect, who look really good, and Conbox as well. But a lot of really good teams have been bumped down into trials because of this reduction in spots in Korea. So Element Mystic, the top team from Contenders, have been bumped down to trials, so they now have to fight for their spot. There's 4 spots left in Contenders, right? And 6 teams have already been invited for trials. Element Mystic, MIG, who used to be the Afrika Freaks roster, so like Rikai, Arhan, etc. But I'm not, that team disbanded, so I'm not actually sure who they're going to field for this trial. Meta Athena, who look pretty good at the moment. They've just picked up Arhan and Rikai actually, along with Sire Player. So that's Meta Athena. Metabellum as well, who now have Hoon and a bunch of other guys who aren't that good. MVP Space, who looked really good, who have like Ado and people in who were playing in Apex last season in the same group as Lunatic High and played pretty well against them with like One Fact and that bunch of guys. And then Seven as well, who came no, actually 7 came second in Contenders. Lunatic High actually came third, I believe. So the first place and second place of Contenders are in this, both really good teams, along with Meta Athena, who's another really good team, and MVP Space, who's another really good team. So there's only 4 spots in Contenders, and that's already 4 Apex level teams who are probably better than some of the other teams who've been invited to Korean Contenders. But it's a bit of a shake-up in that scene at the moment, and presumably the other teams will drop down into the Open Division rather than Apex Challengers if they fail to get into Contenders, which is a big drop for them. Okay, so now we've talked about Contenders Trials and stuff like that, and roughly how the kind of promotion and relegation system works, at least for this season. I'll go and talk about the promotion and relegation a little bit later with regards to the future seasons, but let's talk about the format of Contenders. So the format of Contenders moving forward is so you have your 12 teams, and they get split into 2 groups of 6, and each group plays a round robin. So each group doesn't interact with the other group. They get split into 2 groups of 6, and they play a round robin. So each team plays 5 games throughout the regular season. So you have your 6, and each one of those plays 5 matches against the other 5 in the group. And because both groups of 6 do this, that makes for 30 games throughout the season, throughout the regular season. And as I said, they're split into 2 groups of 6, so they don't actually interact with each other during the regular season. So there's pretty big potential for seeding to play a massive role in how teams are eventually seeded, or just how interesting the season is. I'll talk about some of the pros and cons of the format at the end. Their format sets, same as we presume Overwatch League is going to be, the same as like the World Cup was, same as Overwatch League preseason was, except that you start with a control map, as we've seen basically all the time, apart from in the preseason. So you start with a control map, nobody has to pick a side, loser picks for the next maps, and then it's an Oasis tiebreaker. So if both teams finish 2-2 at the end of a match, it's Oasis all season long for contenders to break the tie. The top 4 from each, so you've got your 12 teams, each has been divided into 2 groups of 6. The top 4 from each one of those groups makes the playoffs. So only the bottom 2 teams out of each group don't make the playoffs. So I feel like that's a pretty good system, because seeding could mess things around so much that you have like 4 super strong teams in one group, but you're unlikely to have 5 or even 6 super strong teams in one group. I mean, the seeding would have to be crazily messed up for that to happen. It's just very unlikely. So I think top 4 from each group making playoffs is a good move. The top 4 from each group, so you've got your 2 groups of 6, top 4 go into a quarterfinal matchup, and then obviously it's just a single elimination bracket from there. So your top 4 go into quarterfinals, the winners go into the semifinals, winners go into the finals, and that's how you decide your placings at the end. So that does mean that there are teams that will never play other teams throughout the whole of Contenders, which is a little unfortunate for a format, especially because the playoff bracket isn't double elimination and stuff like that. Obviously, these things all take more time to do. So by splitting it into 2 groups of 6 rather than just one group of 12, you reduce the amount of games massively. I mean, what do you reduce it by? You reduce it by like 3 times. Playing a round robin with 12 teams gives you a nuts amount. It's like 12 times 11 over 2 or something like that. What does that give you? Like 70 games? Something like this? 65 games. So you're more than half the amount of games you have to play by splitting it into groups of 6, which makes it much more reasonable to cast and cover and play as well. Double elimination playoffs, a little bit unfortunate that they haven't gone for that. I vastly prefer double elimination, or at least as Apex used to do it, double elimination into single elim. So I think we'll see a lot of storylines that end up getting missed out, or don't hit their conclusion, or don't have a satisfying narrative with this format. But again, it's difficult to actually critique the Contenders format, or in fact any tournament format, if you don't know what limitations they were running under. So we have no idea like what their grand plan is, or when they want to finish by, how much time they had, what games they can reasonably cast, what time they have at LAN events and stuff like this. So I feel like I can't even really critique the format, because I couldn't suggest ones that would fit in with their plan, because I just have no idea what their plan actually was, or what their time limitations or cost limitations or anything are. Having said that, when we directly compare it to what it is replacing, which is Apex, now bear in mind that even though there were 3 Apex seasons throughout 2017, and there will be 3 Contenders career seasons throughout 2018, that ran the entirety of the year in 2017, and presumably there'll be some sort of off season. I don't really know how this is going to work, but either way you slice it, the seasons, the tournaments are much shorter with Contenders compared to Apex. But it is a worse format. You're not going to get the same kind of mix in the groups. You're not going to get the same kind of double elimination into single elim. You're not going to see teams with a second chance come back through. Teams like Runaway or Lunatic High, would not have the same kind of awesome runs and great storylines that they get when you have this double elim into single elim like Apex has had for the last 3 seasons. And some of the teams are literally not going to meet each other as well, so you're going to have rivalries that are impossible at the beginning of the season. So for example, if in the first season there are some insanely amazing close games between Rogue and FaZe, who both own spots in Contenders NA, in the second season there might be in completely different groups, not meet in the playoffs, and one of them just gets knocked out in the semifinals, so the other one just goes on to win it or whatever, and okay, that rivalry just didn't exist. It's not a storyline that we could carry through, but we'll see how this tournament plays out in terms of the format. As I said, this video is really just to explain all of the elements of Contenders, go through the rule set and explain it clearly, rather than really give too much commentary on it. Okay, so let's talk about promotion and relegation after this first season. Promotion and relegation going forwards throughout 2018, throughout their 3 seasons and onwards, it works like this. You had your 12 teams in each region. They were split into 2 groups of 6. The 2 groups of 6 played a round robin between themselves. They didn't interact. The top 4 teams from each group went to playoffs. These bottom 2 from each group go into Contenders Trials, which is the promotion and relegation system. So for these 4 guys who did the worst in their groups, the 2 worst teams in the groups, it's a battle for their lives in Contenders. So they go down into Contenders Trials and meet the top 4 teams from Open. And this is a nice blend, I think, of the amount of teams that you would really want. So if Open has a huge amount of really good teams, they can make it in, because if they manage to win their matches, it's then like a round robin between those 8 teams to see who gets through. So if you've got really good teams in Open, it provides a pretty direct route into Contenders. Because if you're good in Open and you finish top 4, and then you are actually good enough to beat some of the Contenders teams, then you will get into Contenders. That's how Apex Challenger worked. That's how so many really good teams have been coming up from Apex Challenger. Teams like GC Busan, teams like Element Mystic, these guys came from like brand new teams, did the qualification to get into Open, went all the way through Open. It was called like Road to Apex and then Apex Challengers, and then made their way into Apex. So I like this system, and it also means that if the teams in Contenders are far better than the teams in Open, then nothing will change. The best teams will just continue to be in Contenders. There's no forced promotion or relegation, even though you don't know who the best team is. It's directly based on who is actually going to beat the other team in this promotion or relegation system. The one thing that this stops, though, is brand new teams being formed and getting into Contenders. So unless a team makes large roster moves in Contenders, which is always very reasonable, you know, for example, if a team like Giganti folded after the next season, and they wanted to pick up a brand new roster of like some French guys who had been just started playing together and hadn't played in Open and so wouldn't be able to get into Contenders Trials, then they could pick up this French roster, according to what we can see from the rules. So that would be the system for brand new teams or brand new players to get in. Otherwise, people are going to have to grind through Open. And the drop from Contenders to Open is pretty massive. The drop from Contenders to Open is so large because you go from being salaried in Contenders, casted in Contenders, you have big prize pools in Contenders, and then you go down to Open where you're playing for no money, or is it like Blizzard account money or something? You're not casted, you have no coverage, and you're almost definitely not salaried because there's no opportunity for them to get return on interest based on their sponsors. There's no eyeballs on their sponsors, there's no prize pools to play for, there's nothing like this, so it's unlikely that you would get salaried if you dropped onto Open. You'd probably get dropped by an organization, and then you would have to grind through another season to get back into Contenders. So this is also such an enormously large gap from Contenders down to Open, is because there are basically no cups or standalone tournaments or things like this happening every week for contenders or top open teams to keep themselves ticking, to generate some income, to give themselves something to supplement whatever part-time job or whatever full-time job they have, just to make it worthwhile for them to continue grinding in open. So whereas in a scene like CSGO or something like this, you have many standalone tournaments. A lot of them have open segments to them, open qualifiers, online components that you can get in and qualify for big LAN tournaments through. So if you're a brand new team, or if you're just an open level team that's clearly too good for open but can't get through the system quick enough because open takes X amount of time to actually complete, you can continue to prove yourself, to show your worth, to earn money, to get sponsored, get casted, potentially get salaried by playing in cups. And even if you have poor performances in a few of them, even if you have good performances in a few, you're still going to be able to get your name out there and get casted occasionally. This doesn't exist in Overwatch. You're just an open team that nobody's heard of, to be honest, until you get into contenders, and you have no opportunities to make money outside of that at the moment. We'll see if some other cup system happens. I would love for it to happen, but at the moment it doesn't seem like that fits into their model at all. Another thing for contenders teams is that it just allows you to get results elsewhere. Like maybe the league format doesn't fit your team. You're like a team that gets really hot at times, or you like figure out unique strategies, but over the course of a whole season, eventually you get red. But standalone tournament systems allow you, it also just allows for variance, because just because you turn up on one day and Kungana loses to Renegades, it doesn't mean that if you played that 100 times, Kungana would beat Renegades 100 times, or rather the other way around, whatever I said. You understand the point though. And so by having tournaments very often, you get repeats of matches, or you get more opportunities to play games against different opponents. And so you see kind of the variance, and you see where the middle ground is. In a league format where in the regular season you only play 5 games, there's a massive amount of variance that could happen when you've got such a small sample size. And then going into single elim playoffs where there's only quarterfinals, semis, and finals, again, massive amounts of variance. You don't really get to show what your average level was. You just get judged on what you're able to bring on the day. So that's one of the issues with there being such a large drop down from contenders to open at the moment. So here's the other juicy thing that I've seen people talking about, which was the contenders contracts as they relate to negotiating with Overwatch League teams. Really important point, and it's something that I've been hammering on about for a while. So let's set the scene. Overwatch League does not interact with contenders in any direct way. There's no promotion, no relegation. Contenders is designed in Blizzard's mind, in Blizzard's model, to be a place for players to prove themselves, to show that they're a really good player. Then Overwatch League teams spot them, spot the talent, and potentially pick them up. Previously, for Overwatch League Season 1, this had a couple of barriers. So if you were in a team like Rogue, we'll use Rogue as an example because they talked about their buyout fees relatively publicly. If you're in a team like Rogue and an Overwatch League team wants to sign one of your players, you have to negotiate with Rogue to not only with the player what you're going to pay him. For example, let's use AKM, because AKM talked about all the time. It's not just about what you're going to pay AKM to be on your team, or whatever signing bonus you're going to give him, whatever annual salary. You also have to pay a fee to Rogue for him to be released to you. Rogue have all the power in that situation because they can decide whether or not to release him because he's under contract with them. And so these are buyout fees, and these were one of the ways for farm teams to make money. And one of the ways that farm teams do make money in other esports is that you sign really good players, you prove that they're really good players by having good performances with them, and then people higher up with much more money come to you and want to sign them for more than you paid for them, because you only paid a small amount for them when they were some random scrub lord that you, with your keen eye, detected that they had this potential, and now that you've proven that they have that potential, everybody realizes, and so now the guys with big bucks are coming to pay for them. And so that's a way that you can make a profit as a farm team, is by selling these players for large buyout fees. The trick with buyout fees is the same as any kind of marketing or any kind of sale, right? Is that you want as much money as you can for a player, so you want to increase the buyout fee as much as possible for AKM, but you don't want to increase it so much that people don't want to buy him because it's just too much money. So the market should end up working out so that you hit like what is their market value for them, so what people are willing to pay whilst generating the most profit for you. But so that's how it worked in the past. It no longer works like that. Buyout fees are now non-negotiable. You don't negotiate buyout fees with the Contenders team. Part of the... Okay, so one more thing. So if you have this situation where you negotiate, let's say with Rogue for AKM, if I want to buy AKM and the buyout fee is really high, and Rogue have set his buyout fee a little too high, so they want as much money as possible, they think AKM's worth X amount, you know, like worth $100,000 to be released from his contract, and they think someone will pay $100,000 for AKM, but they're wrong, and somebody doesn't want to pay $100,000, AKM ends up losing out. So it can be bad for players. It's good for organizations because they get the most amount possible from their players and potentially earn quite a lot of money, but they at the end of the day, it relies on them having an acute sense of what the market value of their players are, and it's potentially bad for the players if they end up getting stuck in like contract hell. People call it like buyout hell or whatever. So now with the new Contenders contract, buyout fees are not negotiable. They're non-negotiable. They have a fixed price, and the fixed price is 25% of whatever you are going to pay that player as an Overwatch League player. So let's use Sinatra's as an example, because it's, as far as I'm aware, the only public Overwatch League contract. And we only know a small amount of it, right? We only know the 150,000. We don't know whether there was a signing bonus or anything like this, but let's use it as an example. So I want to buy Sinatra. He is contracted to Selfless. In the old model, I would have to negotiate with Selfless to find out what the value was. And for example, who was it? Was it Cloud9 and NRG? Cloud9 and NRG are bidding for Sinatra, so they're saying like, "Oh, I'll pay NRG. I'll pay Selfless what 80,000 to sign him." And London Spitfires go, "No, I'll pay 90,000." And NRG go, "No, I'll pay 100,000." Whatever. The buyout fees are now set. So if you want to sign Sinatra now, it would be 25% of his annual Overwatch League salary. So you're intending to pay him $150,000 a year. So 25% of that, quarter it. So that's £37,500. That's how much you have to pay as a buyout fee. If you were going to pay him a signing bonus on top of that, so no signing bonus has ever been publicly announced for Sinatra. Let's say, for example, that he was paid a $25,000 signing bonus directly to Sinatra when he signed. Let's not use 25,000 because it's a horrible number. Let's use 40,000. So he's paid $150,000 a year, and he gets a $40,000 signing bonus. So add them both together, $190,000, and then quarter it. So that now gives you $47,500. That's how much you have to pay Selfless, the organization. That's how much the buyout fee is. There's no negotiation. It's in the contract. You just have to pay Selfless $47,500. And that gets you Sinatra. Obviously, you then have to pay Sinatra his contract. You then have to pay him whatever the signing fee was. The signing bonus, rather. But the buyout fees are now set. What does that mean? This means that the players are loving life because they cannot get stuck in Contenders. If an Overwatch League team wants them and wants to bid for them, then there's nothing that their organization could do to keep them there or hike the price up to get as much money as they want or as much money as they can. The player is going to go to the Overwatch League, and that also means that the Contenders team is going to get a payout if they want your player. But what does that mean in terms of potential bad things? Um, if you're signing people on a minimum contract of 50,000, you would pay a buyout fee of $12,500. That's pretty low for a buyout fee, from what I know of people in the Overwatch scene and what the buyout fees have been. That would be a low buyout fee. Um, that wouldn't be too low because presumably that wouldn't be a great player if you were signing him onto a $50,000 contract. But also, some people are pretty desperate to get into the Overwatch League, so there's a lot of players you could sign for a minimum contract who are worth more and would normally have a larger buyout than that. Also, for example, for Sinatra, you'll realize that I was using the example of like AKM and Sinatra having like $100,000 buyouts and stuff like this. Some of the larger buyouts have been fairly enormous. Not for those, I'm not going to say those players. I don't know what AKM and Sinatra's buyouts were, but for some players, the buyouts have been pretty monstrous. They've been very large. And so having 25% of the Overwatch League salary signing bonus, that 25% is lower than what most contenders teams were getting as buyouts, I believe. Not much lower, and it's not an incredibly low amount by any means, but for people on Reddit who were saying like, oh, this is a massive payday for contenders teams, this is going to make the system better for the teams involved in contenders, I think this is actually, although this is a very set deal, so you know exactly what you're getting coming into it, and you can't be fleeced in any sense, or they can't just wait for the contracts to expire presumably or something, and players aren't going to be worried about signing contracts because they know that they're going to get into the Overwatch League. There's no barriers there, so it's all a much smoother system. It's all lovely. It all works like that. But I think in terms of the actual raw numbers, the contenders organizations are actually now going to potentially get less, depending on how good they were at selling their players, I suppose. Given what I've heard about some buyouts. Having said that, I always thought that the idea of having farm teams in contenders and then selling them to Overwatch League teams was a good model, would be a profitable model if you had talent. If I had to pick up some players now for a contenders team and you were paying them a reasonable salary, i.e. what they were worth based on the viewership that they were getting at the results that they were having, and then you look at the buyout fees that you were able to get, you'd be, if you have a good mind for picking up talent and identifying talent early on, you can make money doing this. This is a reasonable strategy for teams. So it was reasonable before. Now it's much more clear set, and it's still reasonable. But I think this is this just lays everything out and avoids players ever getting screwed over by contracts for contenders teams, and sets a very nice system in place for how players in contenders are able to move into the Overwatch League. But this isn't. I want to like address the thing that was going around Reddit of like, this is a payday for contenders orgs or something. It's not so much a payday. It's better for the players. It's better for the players than the organizations because they just can't get screwed by contracts. So I think I've gone through everything that was in the contenders rule set that was interesting in terms of the format. If you have any questions or something like that, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll get back to them, and I'll try and leave the prize pool information and any of the interesting stuff down in the description below if you didn't catch that before, and also a link just to the rule set itself so you can have a look through that. And I will see you later because I've got a lot of free time over Christmas, so I've got loads of time to do stuff like this now.